She ruined my career with a single lie, so I made her beg me for a job years later. I never thought my life could implode so fast. Years ago, I was 24, fresh out of college, and working in a mid-sized marketing firm that I'd dreamed about joining. I was hungry to prove myself, the type who'd stay late to triple-check presentations and still feel like I hadn't done enough. My best friend at the time, let's call her Chelsea, started at the company 6 months before I did. She was the person who vouched for me to get my foot in the door. At first, we were inseparable. We'd do lunch runs together, trade gossip, even joke about quitting to start our own agency. But looking back, I can see all the tiny cracks I ignored. The competitive remarks she'd slip in when I got praise. The way she'd subtly undermine my ideas in front of management and then later claim she was just trying to help me improve. One morning, everything changed. I walked into the office to find my supervisor, Marla, sitting stiffly at my desk, arms crossed. She looked up at me like she didn't even recognize me. "We need to talk," she said. My stomach lurched. Chelsea was there, too, perched in a nearby chair with her arms folded, her face a careful mask of concern. Marla informed me that there had been missing petty cash, around $600, from a locked drawer in accounting. Apparently, an anonymous tip had come in implicating me. I felt like I'd been punched. I stammered that I'd never touched the money. That I didn't even have access to that drawer. That I had no reason to steal. But it was like they'd already decided. Chelsea looked me in the eyes and said, "I'm sorry, but you told me you were having trouble covering your rent." I thought I'd black out. Yes, I'd vented to her about my bills. But twisting it into evidence I'd stolen? By the end of the day, I was suspended pending investigation. News traveled fast. The whispers felt worse than the actual accusation. No matter what I said, people looked at me sideways. I knew I'd been set up, but I had no way to prove it. Security cameras had a blind spot where the cash was kept. The only other person who even knew about my financial stress was Chelsea. Within a week, they called me back in. I thought maybe they'd realized their mistake. Instead, I was terminated. No severance. No references. Just a bland HR letter about breach of trust. I'd never been so humiliated. My career was over before it even started. I couldn't find work for almost a year after that. Every time I got to the reference check, the offer disappeared. Meanwhile, Chelsea was promoted. She moved into the role I'd been hoping to grow into. I saw her photos on LinkedIn, smiling at conferences, sharing success stories. I sank into a depression I didn't tell anyone about. My family thought I'd screwed up. My college friends drifted away. I started bartending just to pay my rent. Every day, I replayed what happened, wondering how she could betray me so easily. But time does funny things. 3 years later, I finally caught a break. A new agency took a chance on me. I worked my ass off, quietly, determined to rebuild. No one there knew about my past, and I didn't volunteer it. I kept my head down and learned everything I could. In that environment, I thrived. I moved up quickly, earning the respect I'd lost. Eventually, I was promoted to creative director. My salary quadrupled. I built a reputation for turning campaigns around and mentoring junior staff. And then, almost 6 years after Chelsea had destroyed my life, I saw her name pop up in our applicant tracking system. It was surreal. She had applied for an account manager role on my team. The resume was polished but not remarkable. Her cover letter gushed about her passion for marketing. She had no idea the person she'd once stabbed in the back was now the one holding her fate in my hands. And I knew, in that moment, that I wasn't going to let this opportunity slip by. I didn't react right away. I just sat there, staring at her resume on my screen. It felt like I'd been handed the universe's most perfect setup. I'd spent years imagining ways I could confront her, ways I could make her admit what she'd done. But now, here it was, real, tangible. My first instinct was to reject her outright. To click, decline, and feel that petty rush of triumph. But something stopped me. That would be too easy for her. She'd never know why she didn't get the job. She'd never see my face again. No. I wanted her to look me in the eyes and remember. So I scheduled her for an interview. HR sent out the invitation, just like any other candidate. The date was set for the following Tuesday afternoon. All week, I felt a strange electric current buzzing under my skin. I kept rehearsing what I'd say. Part of me wondered if she'd even recognize me after so long. Another part of me hoped she wouldn't, because that would prove how little she cared about the damage she caused. Tuesday arrived, and I made sure to be the last interviewer on her schedule. I wanted to have the final word. When she walked into the office, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked tired. Older. The polish she'd always carried herself with was dulled somehow. Her hair was shorter, her clothes a little dated. She looked around nervously, clutching a leather portfolio to her chest. My heart thudded as I watched her through the glass wall of the conference room. When the recruiting coordinator ushered her in, I stood and offered my hand. "Hi," I said evenly. "I'm the creative director. I'll be conducting this last interview." She looked me straight in the face. For a split second, confusion flickered in her eyes, then nothing. She didn't recognize me. I don't know why, but that hurt more than I expected. All those sleepless nights, all that shame and humiliation she'd caused me, and to her, I was just another anonymous casualty. I gestured for her to sit down. "So, Chelsea," I began, making sure to say her name clearly, "tell me about your experience since you left your previous firm." She launched into her practiced spiel. How she'd led successful campaigns. How she was passionate about client relationships. How she thrived in fast-paced environments. Her voice shook slightly, like she knew she was overselling. I let her talk. I asked her standard questions, and she gave standard answers. It was almost boring. Then, halfway through, I leaned back and asked, "What would you say is your biggest professional regret?" She paused. Her eyes darted to the table. "That's a tough one," she said, forcing a tight smile. "I suppose, not advocating for myself enough when opportunities came up." I stared at her. She didn't flinch. "Interesting," I said slowly. "Nothing else comes to mind?" She looked puzzled. "Not really." I couldn't help it. I let out a soft, humorless laugh. Her brow furrowed. "Did I say something wrong?" I folded my hands on the table. My voice was calm, but inside, I felt like I was vibrating. "No," I said. "But I do find it fascinating that you don't remember me." Her face twitched. "I'm sorry." I gave her a long, deliberate look. "You don't recognize me at all, do you?" She shifted uncomfortably. "I'm sorry, should I?" I took a slow breath. "You accused me of theft 6 years ago. At Westbridge Marketing. I was terminated because of your statement." Color drained from her face. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. "Oh. My God. I didn't, wait. Are you?" "Yeah," I said flatly. "I'm the person you lied about." The silence in that room was so complete, I could hear the clock ticking. She looked like she might pass out. I didn't mean," I raised a hand. "Stop. We'll get to that. First, I'd like you to explain to me exactly why you did it." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. In that moment, every doubt I'd ever had about what she did vanished. Her guilt was written all over her face. Chelsea looked like she was about to throw up. Her hand trembled as she set her portfolio down on the table. She kept opening and closing her mouth, searching for words that wouldn't come. I just sat there, studying her. All the rage I'd carried for years felt strangely distant now, like I was watching someone else's movie. Finally, she managed to whisper, I didn't mean for it to go that far." My jaw tightened. "You accused me of stealing $600. You knew what that would do to me." She shook her head weakly. "I swear, I never thought they'd fire you. I thought maybe you'd get a warning. Or what?" I cut in, my voice low. "Or that you'd look bad enough that they'd promote you instead?" Her eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry. I was desperate. They were about to cut my hours, and I needed that promotion." There it was. The admission I'd always known was true, but never thought I'd hear out loud. I exhaled slowly, feeling a grim kind of relief. "Do you have any idea what you cost me?" I asked. She swiped at her cheek. "I do. I've thought about it every day. I know you probably don't believe that." I didn't answer. She kept talking, voice cracking. "I've made a lot of mistakes. After you left, things weren't as perfect as I thought they'd be. I thought the promotion would fix everything, but it didn't. Eventually, they laid me off anyway. I've been freelancing ever since. I watched her twist her hands together, her knuckles going white. I shouldn't have come here, she whispered. I didn't realize. God, I didn't realize it was you. For the first time in years, I felt like I had the power in the room. You're right, I said. You shouldn't have come here. But you did. She nodded miserably, eyes fixed on the floor. I leaned back in my chair. Tell me why I shouldn't stand up, walk out of this room, and make sure you never set foot in this industry again. Her head jerked up, panic in her eyes. Please. I know I don't deserve your mercy, but I'm begging you. I have nothing left. I'm behind on rent, I have bills piling up, I'm not asking you to forgive me. Just, don't blacklist me. The old me might have felt a twinge of pity. But that version of myself was gone, burned out in the wreckage she left behind. Instead, I let the silence stretch until she shifted uncomfortably. You have no idea, I said evenly, what it's like to have your entire life detonated over a lie. I do now, she whispered. Because I've lost everything, too. I raised an eyebrow. Except, you did that to yourself. I didn't have to lift a finger. She swallowed hard. I could have ended it there. Could have stood up and told HR to shred her application. But part of me wanted her to feel the same dread I'd felt when I walked into that office years ago. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice cold and controlled. You will leave this building. You will tell HR you're withdrawing your application. And you will never use my name on a reference check. Her eyes brimmed with tears again. I understand. And, I continued, you will never contact me again. No messages. No apologies. No attempts to explain yourself. As far as I'm concerned, you no longer exist. She nodded shakily. Okay. I stood. This conversation is over. She rose too, clutching her bag like a life raft. As she passed me, she hesitated, like she wanted to say something else. But in the end, she just lowered her gaze and walked out. I watched her disappear down the hall, her shoulders slumped, her steps slow and defeated. It should have felt triumphant. Instead, it felt hollow. For so long, I'd thought revenge would make me whole again. But as I sat back down, the only thing I felt was tired. Still, I knew I'd done what I needed to. This time, she didn't get to walk away without consequences. After Chelsea left, I sat in that conference room for a long time. I replayed every second of her expression when she realized who I was. Every stammered apology. Every tear. I'd always pictured that moment as some grand catharsis, like seeing her humbled would erase everything she'd stolen from me. But life isn't that clean. Watching her fall apart didn't make me feel triumphant. It just felt final. When I finally stood and walked out, our HR director, Carla, was waiting by her desk. She looked up at me, brows raised in a silent question. Candidate withdrawing, she asked quietly. I nodded. Yes. She realized it wasn't the right fit. Carla seemed to pick up on the tension. She studied my face a moment, then just said, understood. She didn't press further. I went back to my office and closed the door. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. But the aftershocks lingered all day. A couple of my team members came by to ask if I was okay. I told them I was just tired, that it had been a long week. And it had. Just not in the way they assumed. That night, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, thinking about the person I'd been when I met Chelsea. Eager, trusting, almost naive. I missed that version of myself sometimes. But in a strange way, I also respected the person I'd become, the one who'd survived it. The next morning, life went on. Projects still needed sign-off. Clients still needed hand-holding. My team still depended on me. By the end of the week, Chelsea was nothing more than a footnote in my day. HR sent me a brief email confirming she'd withdrawn her candidacy. I didn't reply. I thought that would be the end of it. But 2 weeks later, I got a message on LinkedIn. It was from Chelsea. Just seeing her name in my inbox made my stomach clench. I hovered over the message for a long time before I finally opened it. It was short. I know you asked me not to contact you. I'm sorry for breaking that boundary, but I needed to say this. You were right. I ruined your life to get ahead, and it didn't even help me. I lost everything anyway. You didn't deserve any of it. I hope someday you can find peace. I'm so sorry. I read it twice, then closed the tab. I didn't reply. A younger version of me would have taken that as some kind of closure. But now, I knew better. Closure isn't something you get from the person who hurt you. It's something you give yourself. So I gave it to myself. I archived the message. I went back to my reports. Days turned into weeks. The memory of Chelsea faded further into the background. One evening, about a month later, I was catching up with a former colleague over drinks. She still worked at the old firm, the place where everything had fallen apart. At one point, she leaned in conspiratorially and said, "You know, Chelsea's name came up recently. Apparently she's been blacklisted from a bunch of agencies. Word got around that she burned bridges." I raised an eyebrow. "Really?" She nodded. "It's kind of poetic. She was always so determined to get ahead. And now, well, no one wants to work with her." I didn't say much. Just took a sip of my drink and let the conversation move on. But on the inside, I felt something settle. It wasn't glee. It wasn't vindication. It was simply acceptance. Her story was no longer mine to carry. After that night at the bar, I didn't think much about Chelsea again. My life was full. My career was thriving. I had a team who respected me, clients who trusted me, and enough confidence to know that no one's opinion, especially hers, could ever define my worth again. But sometimes, late at night when things were quiet, memories still bubbled up. The day I was fired. The way she looked at me across that conference room, her eyes bright with false concern. How quickly people who'd claimed to be my friends disappeared the moment I was no longer useful to them. Those moments used to feel like scars. Now, they felt more like reminders of everything I'd overcome. A few months later, something unexpected happened. I was approached by a recruiter about speaking at an industry panel. They were putting together a session on career resilience, navigating layoffs, professional betrayals, and rebuilding after setbacks. The irony wasn't lost on me. Part of me wanted to decline. I'd built my peace by leaving the past where it was. But another part, the part that had survived that humiliation, knew it might help someone else. So I agreed. The event was in a sleek downtown conference center, the kind of place where everyone wears smart casual blazers and sips bad coffee out of paper cups. When it was my turn, I stood in front of a packed room, hundreds of faces turned toward me. I told them the sanitized version of my story, how I'd been falsely accused, how it wrecked my confidence, how long it took to claw my way back. I left out her name and the specifics. I didn't need to humiliate her publicly to validate myself. At the end, a young woman in the audience raised her hand. She looked nervous. "How," she asked, voice small, "do you ever stop being angry?" The question landed so heavily, it was like the air shifted. I thought about it. Really thought about it. "You don't," I said finally. "Not completely. Anger is like any old injury. It flares up sometimes. But eventually, it stops controlling you." She nodded, her eyes shining. After the session, a few people came up to thank me for sharing. One man said my story made him feel less alone. Another woman hugged me and whispered that she'd been through something similar. When I left the conference center, I felt lighter than I had in years. I realized then that Chelsea wasn't the villain in my story anymore. She was just someone who made a terrible choice. Someone who had to live with it. And I was someone who'd survived it. That was enough. The following week, I got another message from LinkedIn. For a split second, my heart kicked up, thinking it might be her again. But it wasn't. It was an old coworker from Westbridge. He wrote, "Hey, I don't know if you've heard, but Chelsea's been trying to reach out to people from the past. She's apparently looking for character references. Thought you should know." I stared at the message, feeling nothing but a distant, weary exasperation. I didn't reply. Instead, I went into my settings and blocked her profile. It felt strangely liberating, like shutting the last door she could ever open to me. Later that day, I told a close friend about it over lunch. "Wow," she said, shaking her head. "If that were me, I'd have been tempted to send her a scathing message." I smiled a little. I used to think that, too. But honestly, she's not worth the energy. And I meant it. Chelsea's name used to be the trigger that set my heart racing, my palms sweating, my mind spiraling. Now, it was just a name. An echo. Something that no longer had any real power over me. The more time passed, the more I realized how little I actually thought about her anymore. My life kept moving. I kept growing. A few months after the panel, our agency landed the biggest client we'd ever pitched. I threw myself into the work, staying late with my team to perfect every detail. Those nights reminded me why I'd fought so hard to get back into this world, because I loved it. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone anymore. It was about proving to myself that I deserved the space I occupied. One Friday, we finalized the campaign and sent it off to the client for approval. I sat at my desk long after everyone else had left, the office quiet around me. I thought back to that first year after I was fired. How I'd come home from bartending shifts and sit on the floor of my tiny apartment, wondering if I'd ever feel like a real professional again. If I could go back and tell that version of myself anything, it would be this: you are going to be okay. Eventually, I did something I hadn't dared to do in years. I went back to my old LinkedIn messages, to the file of screenshots I'd saved from HR. The ones with Chelsea's complaint, the investigation notes, the dismissal letter. I read through them all. It felt like reading a stranger's story. That was the moment I knew for sure that it was over. The anger, the humiliation, the shame, it had all loosened its grip. I closed the file and, without hesitation, dragged it into the trash. I didn't need it anymore. Sometime later, I was asked to mentor a junior colleague who'd recently been let go from another firm under messy circumstances. She was bright, sharp and talented, but her confidence was shot. I recognized that haunted look in her eyes. One evening, we stayed late to prep a client deck. She hesitated before shutting down her laptop. "Can I ask you something?" she said softly. "Of course." She looked down at her hands. "How do you get over something like having your name ruined? How do you move on when you feel like nobody will ever trust you again?" I felt a pang of empathy so strong it surprised me. "Honestly," I told her, "you stop waiting for other people to validate you. You build your reputation again, brick by brick. And one day, you look up and realize you don't care what the people who doubted you think anymore." She nodded, her eyes damp. "Did that happen for you?" I smiled. "Eventually. It took time, but yeah. It happened." And in saying that, I realized it was true. Chelsea's betrayal had defined me for too long. It had shaped every choice I made, every guarded interaction, every cautious step. But it didn't anymore. A few weeks later, I heard through an old contact that she'd left the city entirely. Moved to a smaller town to try to start fresh. When I heard that, I felt nothing. No satisfaction. No bitterness. Just a kind of detached curiosity, the way you'd wonder about an old classmate you hadn't thought of in years. It struck me then that this was real freedom. Not the moment she apologized. Not the moment I confronted her. But the moment she simply stopped mattering. And as I walked home that night, the city lights reflected on wet pavement, I felt a quiet certainty settle in my chest. I had finally, truly let go. After that, life felt easier somehow. I stopped worrying that my past would catch up with me. I stopped bracing for the next betrayal. I'd been through the worst, and I'd come out stronger than I ever imagined. A few months later, I was promoted again, this time to executive creative director. It was the culmination of everything I'd worked for. The day I signed the offer letter, I sat in my office alone for a moment, just taking it all in. The skyline looked different from that corner office. Brighter. Bigger. Like anything was possible again. If you'd told me years ago that I'd end up here, I wouldn't have believed you. Back then, I thought one lie had ended my future. But it hadn't. One evening not long after the promotion, I was invited to a networking dinner with other creative leaders in the industry. The kind of event where everyone tries to outcharm each other over overpriced cocktails. At some point, I found myself standing with a small group trading war stories, projects that had imploded, clients who'd disappeared, agencies that had folded overnight. One of the men in the group, a tall guy with salt and pepper hair, looked at me and said, "You know, you're one of the few people I've heard described as genuinely resilient. What's your secret?" I thought about it for a second. "Perspective," I said finally. "When you've survived something that nearly broke you, everything else feels manageable." He smiled. Spoken like someone who's been through it. I nodded. "I have." And that was all I needed to say. It felt good to know that my story wasn't a cautionary tale anymore. It was proof that you can lose everything and still build something better. As the night wound down, I stepped out onto the balcony to get some air. The city sprawled out below me. Thousands of windows lit up, each one a life, a story, a struggle. I thought of all the times I'd felt like I was the only one who'd been knocked flat. But the truth was, everyone gets blindsided eventually. Everyone has to choose whether to stay down or get back up. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened LinkedIn, almost on autopilot. Her profile was still blocked. I hovered over the unblock button for a moment, wondering if I should let curiosity get the better of me. But then I thought of that girl I'd mentored, the one who'd asked how you ever stop being angry. You stop being angry when you stop looking back. So I put my phone away. That weekend, I flew home to see my parents for the first time in months. We sat around the kitchen table, the same one where I'd cried the night I got fired, and they asked me about work. I told them about the promotion. About the new clients. About how proud I was of the team I'd built. My mom reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "We always knew you'd find your way," she said. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it too. After dinner, I took a walk around the neighborhood I grew up in. The houses were smaller than I remembered, the trees taller. I thought about how much had changed, and how much hadn't. And as I stood on the sidewalk where I used to wait for the school bus, I felt something lift from my shoulders. A burden I'd carried for so long, I almost didn't notice the weight anymore. I was done letting her story shape mine. I was done carrying what she did. I was free. When I got back to the city after that weekend, everything felt different. Lighter. Cleaner. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about Chelsea anymore. Not even in passing. It was like my brain finally accepted she was no longer relevant to my life. My focus was exactly where I wanted it to be. On my team, my projects, and the people who had shown me loyalty and respect. One morning, as I walked into the office early to prep for a major pitch, I passed the receptionist, who handed me a thick envelope. "Courier dropped this off for you," she said. I frowned. I wasn't expecting any documents. Inside was a plain letter. No header, no logo. Just a few paragraphs typed in a simple font. It was from Chelsea. I skimmed the first line and felt my heart seize for a second. But this time, it wasn't dread. It was a kind of incredulous exhaustion. The letter was an apology. A real one, or at least an attempt. She wrote that she knew she had no right to contact me, but she wanted me to know she'd confessed to HR at our old firm. She claimed she'd told them she fabricated the accusation and that she hoped they'd correct the record, for whatever that was worth. She ended by saying she was leaving marketing altogether. She decided to move home to care for her aging parents and start over with some honesty for once. I set the letter on my desk and stared at it for a long time. If she'd sent this years ago, I would have dissected every sentence, looking for hidden motives. I would have obsessed over whether she meant it. But now, all I felt was tired of the story. I didn't need her confession to validate my truth. I'd known it all along. Later that day, I walked the letter down to the building's shred bin and let it fall into the slot without a second thought. It felt final in a way nothing else had. No more hidden files. No more old emails. No more lingering what-ifs. The next few weeks were some of the most peaceful of my professional life. Our big campaign launched and exceeded every benchmark. My team was ecstatic. I took them out for celebratory drinks, and as we clinked our glasses, I realized I'd never been prouder of where I'd landed. One of the newer hires, a smart, kind woman named Elise, pulled me aside before she left. "I just want you to know," she said shyly, "you're the best boss I've ever had. You make it easy to feel safe here." Something about that comment almost undid me. Because for so long, I'd felt unsafe. Like my career could be ripped away on someone else's whim. Hearing that I'd become the kind of leader I'd always wished I'd had made every awful moment worth it. That night, I walked home through streets that used to feel intimidating when I was broke and starting over. Now, they felt like mine. The next morning, I came in early again, but this time not because I was afraid. Because I was excited. Because I wanted to keep building. And that's when I realized the real lesson in all of it. Revenge is never as satisfying as growth. The day Chelsea lied about me, she thought she'd ended my story. But all she really did was start a new one. One where I stopped letting other people define who I was. One where I learned my resilience could outlast anyone's betrayal. One where, eventually, I became someone I respected. Someone who didn't need to look back. And someone who knew, without a shred of doubt, that the worst thing that ever happened to me had also been the catalyst for everything good that followed. Because losing everything taught me the one truth no one can ever take away: I could rebuild. And I did. And that's it, The lie that cost me everything, and the journey that gave me more than I ever imagined.